So the outlook for this career. So I'll just address just being a PhD student researcher. So I think there'll always be positions, right, for up and coming students to pursue masters and PhDs as researchers. It is quite competitive, but I think there'll always be that. And then how do I kind of see this changing over the next 5 years? So just becoming more technology advanced, and just continuing to focus on the most relevant issues, the most interesting questions, right? Like every day, you know, just keeping up with the research every day, and as a student reading studies every day, it always spark new questions, and especially with the prevalence of diseases these days, and chronic diseases, there's always going to be more questions to answer and more ways that we can advance the field. So I don't really see it changing in terms of conducting research per se, but the questions that we'll be answering will continue to move forward.
Awesome. Thank you everyone for your answers. The next question is, do you guys think that there is a shortage or an oversupply of people in your career today?
It probably is very dependent on the area. So depending on somebody's background or expertise or what their educational background might entail, it could be one or the other. Sometimes we might have too many people who are eligible for a position in a particular area. And then on the other hand, there might be a shortage of trying to find people that have that level of expertise to bring to the institution. So I can't really say one or the other. I think it really is dependent on the program or the actual position itself.
I know for occupational therapy, as I mentioned earlier, there is a shortage. In my area, school pediatrics, most of the time there may be positions and there aren't enough people to fill them. So that's why we end up taking on large caseloads. So there is a shortage.
I think in prosthetics and orthotics, it's depends on how you look at it. Because when I certified a while ago, I couldn't find a job across Canada for like 7 months, 4 months, 5 months, something like that. So I lived in Ontario and I took a job in BC because I wanted to start working and I wanted to move to BC. But it took 5 months to get one, and I sent a resume to everybody. It seems like, because we do a lot with the students at our clinic, it seems like everyone gets a mentorship, a residency, and then a job eventually from that. The two things that are the main concerns are, so because you're doing prosthetics and orthotics, when you choose to do residency, you can choose which one you want to do at that point. Some people who may be interested in prosthetics then go into orthotics for the residency because there's a job close to their home or close in their province. Some people who, like myself, who wanted to do one thing over the other and didn't really want to do the other one, and are willing to move somewhere. There's always a job somewhere, and I don't want to forget about the technical program because that's fairly important too. It is important too. There is a huge need for technicians. Everybody needs a technician, and we just hired 2 actually from the school because we needed a technician now, and there's not a lot with experience out there. So, yeah, the technical program is always a option, and in the tech program, you can then apply to the clinical program after you've graduated as well. So.
So I wouldn't necessarily say that there's an oversupply or shortage of researchers. I think having more people pursuing similar questions is beneficial just to arrive at those conclusions earlier. And I think the benefit of exercise science or kinesiology is that it's relatively new in comparison to other disciplines. So I think there will always be a demand for researchers within this field. And I think that just, you know, as you guys know, I said my ultimate career goal is to be a professor. I think that there's many fields within kinesiology and exercise science. So I think that there'll always be many career opportunities, at least in the near future. And I think it kind of depends on what kind of your expertise is and what you have to bring to the table and whether the institution is seeking that or not.
Great, thank you. So on to our career decision section. The first question for that is, why did you choose this career? What made you want to be who you are today?
I think I figured that out after I graduated with my degree. So when I was in undergrad, I really liked the area that I was in, obviously with kinesiology, and then did a lot of psychology and science related courses. But you know, I wanted to be a physician. That was my first and ultimate goal. And then after graduation, I was accepted into a couple different programs through UBC and SFU, and I chose that master's route. And I think it was there that sort of started to get paved as to what I truly wanted to do. So throughout my research and my involvement with St. Paul's Hospital and within cardiac rehab and those sorts of things, I was given the opportunity from some of my mentors at UFE to come back and do some guest lectures. And that's where it started to sort of spin from, is I just really enjoyed that classroom environment. I'm comfortable up in front of a classroom and teaching and trying to provide, you know, education and learning opportunities. So I think it just stemmed from there. And then that path just started to forge forward and resulted in me being back at UFE, but just in a different position as not a student, but as a faculty member.
For me, I was working with children and youth, and I was working abroad with a few NGOs, and I met a child that lived with disabilities, but in their culture, it was interpreted as a curse, a spiritual curse, and so she was kept in a closet. And so when we met her, you could see some of her limbs had formed to the shape of the box that she lived in for years. And I remember meeting her and thinking, you know, people with disabilities should not have to live this way. There should be more knowledge about what they're able to do. And so because I love the outdoors, I just came back. I quit my job and went back to school and became an OT later in life. So, and I love that that's what we do. Or the ethos of our profession is to enable occupation in people in spite of all the different challenges that there may be present. So that's what I love, enabling ability.
Like Amber, I too wanted to be a physician. This obscure program called chemistry, and my marks in that program didn't lend itself to becoming a doctor. So I, okay, what did I do? I volunteered in Kosovo for a while, and there noticed a lot of landmine victims, kids especially, and so I thought to myself, it would be pretty cool to do a job where I could go overseas and do it, or I could do it at home. I worked at a sports camp when I was in university as well, and there was a gentleman there by the name of Rob Schnook, who was the 100 and 200 meter Paralympic Canadian champion, who trained there, and I used to run it. Kids at the camp used to want us to run, race against each other. At the time, I was a little bit more svelte and was a lot quicker, and so we used to run, and he used to beat me every time. And so it sparked my interest in someone with one leg, and obviously a prosthetic leg, could beat someone with two, but also that someone somewhere out there made him a leg that allowed him to do that. So then I looked into prosthetics, and I I have done work overseas in Haiti and in China in prosthetics, and the job itself is just right in my wheelhouse. It's academic. It's a lot of biomechanics, a lot of anatomy. I like dealing with the patients every day. You deal with them a lot, so you build friendships. I get people texting me on weekends telling me how their weekend was with their prosthetic leg or their arm, and people thanking me, after doing something that they couldn't do before. So those things are all great. But there's also an artistic side to the job where, a lot of things we do still are hand casting and modifying a cast by hand. So it's almost like sculpting in a way. Fabricating devices, we use cool machines that, and cool materials like carbon fiber and resins, and I don't know. It's a good mix for me in terms of all my likes all into one job. That's why I chose it.
So I think I'll start off with just being a PhD student researcher and then kind of branch off and my goal being a professor. So kind of why did I pursue PhD school? So I'm very interested in research, and I think you just kind of have to be interested in seeking questions and kind of being on that never-ending pursuit of seeking optimal. Although in research you'll never quite get there, right? There's going to always be more research to conduct, more questions, more discussion, more learning. But to me that's really cool, because that means that we can always advance, right? So that's kind of why I chose to pursue PhD school. And then my goal being a professor. So I kind of figured that out when I was at Florida Atlantic University. So I was the instructor for the undergraduate exercise physiology course. I really enjoyed it. Being involved in both research and teaching. I kind of preferred the teaching, I should say, as a career, although I really enjoy the research. I think I'll always be involved in research in some shape or form, but I have no desire to kind of have my own lab. But I think I kind of found that out at FAU and teaching the undergraduate course there. So yeah, that's kind of why I chose to pursue PhD school and kind of my aspirations for the future.
Awesome. Thank you for answering those. The next question is, what are the 3 things that you wish you did as a student to better prepare yourself for your career?
I'm going to answer this in 2 ways. I'm going to say what I did as a student, and then I'm going to say what I wish I had done in addition to that. So as a student, I don't think that probably all of us are going to say the same thing, but you need to get out there and you need to get connected and you need to volunteer. As many opportunities are provided to you. I know it can be hectic sometimes, balancing work and school and everything else, but take advantage of those opportunities. Whoever your mentors are or whoever you're working with. I did a lot of volunteering in my undergraduate. Any opportunity that came my way, I sort of tried to take it on as best as I could. Another thing I think, as far as what I wish I would have done perhaps, is I wish that I would have traveled a bit more. So I spent majority of my 20s in undergraduate and graduate education, and I wish that I had taken advantage of field opportunities to travel abroad for education, or just to travel in general, just to get that experience and to then bring that back into the working environment. So I think, yeah, I did a lot of volunteering and I applied myself. I did a lot of the same research, so different classes, but the same area, because then it sort of, again, helped you or was more beneficial to you with having that background and taking those research opportunities that may have come up at that time. But I do wish I had traveled a bit more.
Yeah, I agree with Amber. I think that traveling before you decide where you want to go, it's a great way to get to know yourself and to also like mature into that person that you're going to be, so that whatever you pick can be more in symmetry with who you are. Because I think that's why later on in life, I actually found my vocational calling. It took me a while. So So that's something that I would recommend. And the other piece would be to really, yeah, keep in touch with mentors and seize those opportunities. One of the aspects of OT is private practice. And I remember that a bunch of us graduated and we didn't know all the basics of negotiating, you know, a private contract and what does it mean to be a contractor and all of that. So I think if there is a particular area in the practice that you want to go, try to meet people and just try to ask questions about what does that look like. And for sure, keep in touch with your classmates because they are always a great resource. I have learned a lot of things through them and it saved me a lot of heartaches or headaches along the way. So I think those are great things to do. And I'm so happy that I had that and I still do.
Yeah, I think there's a question later that is almost my same answer, but pretty much what everyone else just said. I feel like I did okay as a student in terms of what I need to do. I did a lot of volunteering, but I didn't do enough, obviously, because, you know, I always say this, I've been doing this talk or a version of this talk for UFB since 2007. So 13 years, I think, maybe 14. And I don't remember her name, but there was an OT that went on and she made the job sound so amazing. And it is an amazing job. But I knew nothing about it before that time. And I mean, I saw a bit in school and whatever, but, you know, I love my job, obviously, and I've told you why. But had I known about OT, that would have been a tough choice, I think. So, I mean, even though I think I did a lot of volunteering and I did a lot of networking, I still missed stuff. So I would have done more. You know, there's always room to do more. And I always say that, you know, why not try something to make sure you don't like it, you know, because I don't want to put down professions, but I volunteered as a physio for a long time. And it's a great job too. I deal with lots of physios and they're great people, but it takes a certain person to be a physio. And it's not everyone that graduates kinesiology that, you know, when I went into kinesiology, that was everyone's goal, was to become a doctor or a physio. And I think if you just branch out, that's sort of the key. It wasn't for me. And so then I looked at other options and volunteering helped. Travel was also on my list, and then I got thinking, you know, I graduated university with negative money. So I didn't have money to travel. But the way I did it was, you can find organizations, especially volunteer positions, that sometimes pay most of, or if not all of your way to these trips. Again, may not be your destination that you want, but I think the amount I learned traveling in university, even in summer and afterwards, was huge in terms of who I became and how I became it and where I went in life.
So I think the biggest thing as a student to better prepare me for my career is probably learning statistics and how to interpret them. So that was definitely a challenge at first. You know your basics, but you definitely run into certain studies that you'll be reading and you find statistics and you just are like, you know, what's going on? So I think just learning statistics, learning how to interpret research in your undergrad is really important. And then just get involved in research as soon as possible. So I didn't get involved in research in my undergrad, unfortunately, but I would highly suggest that if that's an option at your institution, I'd highly suggest that. And then just a final point is just understand how much money it's going to be if you're an international student. It's, you know, like I tried to budget as much as I could, and like I had everything figured out months in advance, and like you get down there and you figure out, okay, there's things that arise as an international student that you didn't anticipate that are going to be more costly. And typically the tuition's much more costly. So just something to keep in mind if you're planning on pursuing graduate school outside of Canada.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that with us. The second last question we have today is, what are some common mistakes that people make when choosing this career, or choosing the career that you guys are with?
I don't know if there's really a mistake with choosing this career. I think that once you're in that position to get into education and academics, you probably have had an idea of what that's going to entail. I think that sometimes there might be a bit of a misconception that, you know, that education background, like a PhD, is going to automatically just lend you a job. And I think that that's not necessarily true. Given that it is quite competitive, and you know, you have to be willing to possibly relocate, or like Landon was saying before, you know, do a postdoc somewhere to just sort of better your background for your application. So I don't know if there's any mistake necessarily. I think it's just making sure that you're really understanding that it's a competitive environment and that you might not get a position right away, and it might take time to get that position, or you might have to take other types of positions to gain more experience to then hope to get into that field.
I think for occupational therapy, actually, Jesse touched on it. There isn't enough awareness about what OT does. Like, there's so many times I'm in an elevator and someone would be like, "Oh, you're an OT, you help people find jobs." And I'm like, no, you know? So, yeah, I feel like the only reason why I found OT was exactly because what Jesse was saying. In my intro to kinesiology, we're supposed to shadow different professionals, right? And figure out which one it's compatible with you. So at the physio clinic, I discovered the OT and I just was like, sure, I'll check her out too. And then I was like, oh, wow, there's this whole new world out there. So I think, yeah, definitely like being open to checking things out. And the other piece that I find too is that people think that getting into OT is really hard and it's gonna, you know, it's gonna take a lot of effort, but they have relaxed a lot of the entry requirements because they want to make the profession more attractive. So look into it, and you never know. You can get in, or maybe you need to do a couple of extra things. It's not an impossible thing. So.
Okay, I'll look into it. I'm just kidding. do you need chemistry for that? Probably do, don't you? I think there's a few questions that we missed that actually tie in with this question anyway, but I don't know whether it's mistakes either, but I think in any profession that you get into where it's other than, you know, where there's lots of jobs. So prosthetics, there's not, and orthotics, there's not a lot of places in BC or in Canada. I think there's just over 100 of us in Canada alone for prosthetics. I think there's 200 or 300 prosthetists and orthotists in Canada. So Amber, I think you mentioned relocating or the ability to relocate is a key if you're really interested in this profession, because that job might not be available when you first graduate, and it may be available later, but you know, you might have to spend a couple of years somewhere else before that comes up. So if that's important, you should know that first. And I think in general, my opinion of the profession before I got in it was, you know, you just make legs and arms for people, and you get to make stuff, and that's it. And then you get to deal with patients, and everybody's friendly, and no one has complaints, and that's definitely not true. And also, that's only half my job. I mean, the other half is paperwork, which I loathe, and you know, not, again, a myth I had before going in was that everyone just got whatever they needed, right? And that's not the case. There's different funding, like I mentioned before, and nobody wants to pay. That's like every insurance and every paid agency. So you're dealing a lot with funding and trying to work around that so that people get at least somewhat of what they want. Also, I think in prosthetics, I can only speak for prosthetics. There's no magic pill, right, to take to have a prosthesis that works perfectly for that patient. It's kind of the best of what's around instead of the perfect option. You know, someone who wants to say for an arm amputee, someone who wants to kayak and also, I don't know, shoot a basketball. Those are two different devices, and that's not always paid for. So you sort of have to pick the best one, or, you know, certain feet only are for certain activity and not others, so you can't get both. So those type of things. There's it's not a perfect scenario in this profession, but it's constantly improving, and yeah, those are just things that I wish I knew before I got into it.
So I think the most common mistake for those pursuing graduate school is just not being super interested in what you're doing and just not being heavily involved in the process. So, you know, I think if you're not super interested in what you're doing, or you're not well prepared, you know, I've seen people that get halfway through a thesis and they drop out of the program. And so I think just being very interested in what you're doing is really important, because you'll get to the end and you might not be as interested, just simply because of, you know, frustration or all the hard work that goes into it. So I think that's just a common mistake. Just make sure you really want to do it if you're going to pursue grad school. So that's kind of my biggest takeaway.
Awesome, thank you. And on to our very last question. If you could leave us with one piece of advice, what would it be?
I'm going to bullet point the one piece of advice, because there's just a few things that I would say. Again, I sort of would go back to what I was saying before about just volunteering and getting as involved and network as much as possible that you can. But I also think that, you know, as a student and as you're evolving through your career, you have to be, you know, resilient and perseverant. Like, life happens and that's okay. And just know that it's okay, and then be resilient with that. And, you know, you can make the changes that you need to make, and be open to making those changes. And I would just sort of leave you with one thing that my dad always taught us when we were young is, you know, work hard and play hard. And then it's a great balance. You can either let the day run you, or you can run your own day. So I think it's really in your hands as far as where you want to go with it.
I think what I will encourage people to do is be vulnerable, risk putting yourself out there and saying what your dreams are and what you want to do. There is rewards to it. People like mentors or friends will then hear something that's related to what you said, it was your dream, and then you start to develop connections and networking. And I wouldn't be where I am without the help of the people around me. And as you can see, I'm very chatty. So yes, I was putting myself out there saying what I wanted to do and where I wanted to be. And I continue to do that. And it surprises me how people help you to get there. And there's always a way. So yeah, just risk, be vulnerable, and seize the opportunities. It's going to involve, yes, some failures, or maybe you're going down that way and you're like, oh, that was the wrong way, and you got to back up and go the next way. But it's worth it if it gets you to where you want to be, and every day you're excited about what you're doing. So
Amber and Alex stole both my ideas, but I don't know. Aside from what they just said, I would also say that do what you want to do, not what your parents want you to do, or what you think you should do. You know, I shouldn't say this on this forum, but if you do 4 years of kinesiology and then don't want to do it anymore, don't do it. I mean, you're going to ruin your life. You got a lot of life left, and if you start it the wrong way, you can always change it, but it's a lot harder, right? so yeah, travel, do the things you have to do before you go into school, but know what you want to do before you do it. I say this to my daughter, she's only 4, but I think the earlier I say it to her, the more it's going to kick in. But I always tell her, I say, grow your worth and know your worth, right? So you grow your worth by doing the experiences that can build you up and make you grow as a person. But at the same time, when you go to get that job or go to get that placement in school or whatever you're doing, know your worth, know how important you are and how you're needed in society, and go forth that way.
So probably the biggest piece of advice I could give for those that are interested in pursuing grad school and doing research is make sure you look into finding a good lab and a good mentor that's going to be a good fit for your research. You read horror stories about mentors and labs, but I think just really looking into all your options and finding a really good lab, really good mentor is really important, and reaching out to students that have worked under that mentor and in that lab to see, what the mentor's like, what the lab dynamic is like. I think that's really important, and that can kind of make or break, your experience in grad school. And I was fortunate to have a good mentor during my master's, and my mentors. I have 2 mentors being co-supervised for my PhD. They're phenomenal as well. So that has really helped with me have a really positive experience in grad school. So I think that's my biggest piece of advice. And also just have the self-belief and know that there's going to be failures along the way, but just be able to persevere and think about that end goal, but also enjoy the process.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. I know we went a little bit over time, so I appreciate it. If anyone has any further questions for our panelists, please message us or email us, and we will connect them with you. And once again, on behalf of all the faculty, staff, and students at UFE Kinesiology Department, we would like to thank you for joining us today.